Good evening, everyone. Virgo here. It is January 10th, 2021. I have had a question by several subscribers that they would like for me to give some additional information to, which I have no problem doing. I wasn't actually going to do this video. I had been asked a couple of days ago by a subscriber if I would do a video on the Insurrection Act and what that entailed. And I wasn't going to do that video because I didn't want to get into a lot of the political stuff after everything that had happened at the Capitol on Wednesday. But being that I've now had 5 or 6 more people ask me about it, and some very specific questions where they seem to misunderstand the powers that it provides to the president, it's probably important now that I actually do give some additional information with regards to the Insurrection Act. First off, let me say that there seems to be some misunderstanding out there that the current president is signing or somehow ink-blotting a Insurrection Act. And that is not the case. The Insurrection Act of 1807 has been in law since 1807. If for some reason he were going to invoke the Insurrection Act, that would be all that he would need to do. There would be no need to sign anything. So if you're hearing on videos, for example, people make claims that, the president signed the Insurrection Act this morning or last night, or they're not telling you the truth, because that isn't something that would occur. Now, what is the Insurrection Act? It's the legal vehicle that a president uses in order to federalize the National Guard, in order to suppress specifically insurrection. So, I'm just going to use an example here. Let's say that there's a riot in downtown Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Police Department and surrounding police departments are unable to contain it. As a result of that, generally what would occur would be the president would either pick up the phone and contact the governor, or the governor would pick up the phone and contact the president and request for assistance through the National Guard. They both agree that that's the best thing to do, being that the police departments are unable to contain what's going on, and bam, the National Guard is sent out to assist. But in cases where maybe there's a disagreement, for example, let's just say that the riot is so large in downtown Los Angeles that the police department is so outweighed that they're not willing to go out and get themselves killed. And as a result, they refuse to do anything without the assistance of the National Guard. And let's just say, arbitrarily, that the governor says, our police forces can handle this. You're not going to embarrass my city this way. And he insists that the police departments take care of it on their own, or at least attempt to try. The president watching this scenario may say, you know what, enough of this. We have to stop this riot. I'm going to go ahead and federalize the National Guard via the Insurrection Act of 1807. At that point, there is a solid reason to do so. Because number one, they're either not able or not willing to break down that riot. The Insurrection Act gives the president the right to step in and say enough is enough. For the purpose of law and order and the safety of our citizens of the city of Los Angeles, I am now invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 in order to stop these rioters. And that's the end of the story. Once they have done their job, the National Guard is no longer needed. It's over and done with. There seems to be several misunderstandings with regards to what the Insurrection Act can provide to the president. And what I just informed you of is basically what it provides. It has to be a specific circumstance. It has to be that circumstance that the military goes in and deals with. And the reason why that's the case is because there are other laws behind it, like posse comitatus, that suppress or make it unconstitutional to use the Insurrection Act for other purposes. And see, the reason why there's these clashing laws, as it may seem, is in case there ever were to happen to be someone in office that became tyrannical and decided that they wanted to use something like the Insurrection Act of 1807 to attempt to try to do things that they are not supposed to do, to attempt to try to overthrow the government, for example, or to attempt to try to take citizens' rights away. So we're going to be discussing that in just a moment here. But before I do, so the Insurrection Act has never been used in any context other than suppressing civil unrest. Here's some history on the Insurrection Act, but it'll also give you a good indication of how rarely this particular act is used, for good reason, obviously. It was last used in 1992 in response to unrest that was sparked by the Rodney King verdict. The Insurrection Act was also invoked in 1968 in response to the unrest that was following the death of Martin Luther King. And in 1957, 1962, and then again in 1963 to help enforce civil rights laws in the face of local oppression to federal court orders requiring school integration. Ulysses S. Grant used it in 1871 to suppress the KKK, and it was used during the Civil War to impose a blockage of the ports of 7 southern states. Only in very rare instances has it been used against the wishes and without the consent of state and local officials. And it has never been used to deny federal and state rights to its own citizens. I have some interesting questions, which is the reason I decided to make this particular video. My first question was asked by Pauline. Pauline asks, is there a way that the Insurrection Act can be used by President Trump in order to overturn the results of the 2020 election? Thank you for your question, Pauline, and I will do the best I can to answer this for you accurately. So any attempt to deploy the military to overturn the results of the 2020 election would actually violate multiple federal laws. First, it would violate the Posse Comitatus Act that I just spoke to you about. That's an 1878 law that's codifying the long-standing principle that the military cannot engage in domestic law enforcement. It's 18 USC 1385, if anybody wants to actually look that up at any point. As a matter of fact, I'll link it in the description of this podcast. The Insurrection Act is understood to provide a rare exception to Posse Comitatus, based on a civil emergency that requires immediate restoration of law and order. Conditions that would simply not be satisfied here, even if Trump's allegations of election fraud turned out to be true. There are specific laws designed to criminalize election interference by the military. Members of the armed forces, for example, who assist with the overthrow of a lawful election can be held criminally liable under 18 U.S.C. 592 and sentenced for up to 5 years in prison. More significantly, however, a series of criminal provisions in federal law prohibits attempts to overthrow the lawful authority of federal and state government. These laws could subject President Trump or others that are involved in such a plan to severe criminal charges, much in the way that 1861 firing on Fort Sumner by Confederate forces after the election of Abraham Lincoln was criminal. 18 U.S.C. 2383 criminalizes, quote, rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, end quote. 18 U.S.C. 2384 criminalizes, quote, seditious conspiracy, end quote, which prohibits two or more individuals by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States. And 18 U.S.C. 2385 makes it a crime to knowingly or willfully advocate, abet, advise, or teach the duty, necessity, desirability of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any specific state by force or violence. So with additional penalties for conspiring to do the same with another person. The participation of multiple individuals in such a plan would constitute a conspiracy under federal law, thus enhancing the penalties for any of the above acts that I just spoke of, performed in conjunction with another party, with the exception of the crime of seditious conspiracy, which is already a collective offense. Several of these provisions not only provide for jail time, but also preclude employment in the federal government following conviction. So that means, among other things, that it would prevent a president from running for president again. It would prevent a senator from running for office anywhere again. And anyone who assisted that was holding any federal office, it would prevent them from ever holding any form of federal office again. Seditious conspiracy and similar offenses applying to a sitting president. That's something that is another question many people might have. And there's no telling what the informal advisors to the current president might suggest. A lot of people believe that the president is unable to be indicted, for example, because he's a sitting president, due to his extensive Article II powers. And since he is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the military would be bound to obey. That's what most people believe. But this is actually wrong in this case. It's wrong on all counts, and indeed White House counsel Pat Cipollone reportedly tried to push back by telling the president that proposals raised during the Friday meeting were none within his constitutional authority. But that is not simply about the constitutional authority. It also involves military and criminal law. And this was back when President Trump was talking about the potential of calling in this act into play in cities that were having some rioting happen in them. And the governor saying, no, we're dealing with it. And President Trump saying, you know, I'm going to send somebody in if this doesn't stop. So, first of all, well-trained military personnel understand that the duty to follow orders is limited to legal orders. And under Article 90 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMI, look it up if you need to, the duty of obedience to the chain of command does not apply to orders that are known to be illegal. Thus, even the President of the United States, who may issue an illegal order to overturn an unlawful, or to overturn a lawful election, for example, would be unlawful. That order not only would not be obeyed, but it could not be obeyed by the officers and enlisted men and women whose primary duty is to defend and uphold the Constitution. There's other routes for that type of scenario, such as taking it to the courts. Second, active duty as well as retired military officers would be subject to the UCMJ, I'm sorry, not the UCMI. I don't know what I was thinking. The UCMJ. And as such, they could be held criminally liable for mutiny or sedition under 10 U.S. Code 894, a provision that is broader than its civilian counterpart. Much broader. So this would apply to anyone who, as a retired officer or someone who is active duty or someone who's working in the Pentagon, or it doesn't matter, could be charged and subject to court martial under this particular provision. What is more, civilians could be held liable under 10 U.S. Code 2 for aiding and abetting someone who's in the military's violation of the UCMJ. So keep in mind, I apologize. I know I called it the UCMI. I don't know why I did that. The UCMJ is what you'd need to look at in order to find those regulations, and I'm just giving you a synopsis of it. Secondarily, not even the president would have immunity under Article 2 from criminal prosecution, were he to actually attempt to overthrow the results of the election. Under Trump versus Vance, decided by the Supreme Court in July of 2020, Trump was unable to assert presidential immunity to repeal a criminal subpoena for financial records of the Trump Organization, sought by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance. At oral argument in the Second Circuit, the president's lawyers had presented one of the most extreme interpretations of presidential powers ever offered in the court of law, namely that under his Article 2 constitutional authority, the president could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue without being either investigated or indicted until after he had left office. Following the Second Circuit's rejection of this extreme appeal to immunity, the Supreme Court had no difficulty agreeing that the president would absolutely not be immune to criminal process, including investigations and subpoenas. The court thereby sent the powerful message that no one in the United States of America, including the president, is above the law. Like ordinary citizens, the president is subject to generally applicable criminal laws, both state and federal. Although the Supreme Court did not address whether a sitting president can be indicted, even the Office of Legal Counsel, opinions that a president should not be indicted while in office accepted that he could be indicted and prosecuted immediately following the end of his term. Existing Office of Legal Counsel's opinions also recognize that even a sitting president can be criminally investigated by the Justice Department. Indeed, that is precisely what Robert Mueller did. There are some extreme scenarios that surely would cause even the OLC to rethink its own statements for deferred prosecution. For example, if the president is in the course of carrying out an ongoing violent crime, such as shooting people on Fifth Avenue, or a military coup, he could be subject to immediate arrest. Still, an expansive vision of presidential powers under Article 2 has made dangerous inroads on our constitutional democracy, fueled by a legal fiction known as the theory of unitary executive. This theory was originally a thesis about the president's power to remove upper-level executive branch officials, but it has broadened over the years to justify virtually limitless use of presidential power. As President Trump once put it, quote, "I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president." Well, in this specific case, that would not be the case. Several federal laws are being broken here, and what would be viewed as a tyrannical takeover simply would not be tolerated by the courts or by the Office of Legal Counsels, the DOD. Requesting that the military go against the Constitution specifically is something that would be a big red flag also. My next question is from Teresa. Teresa asks, would this give President Trump the right to arrest his opponent? The simple answer is no, it wouldn't. Because once again, we're dealing with a scenario that is specifically used for the purpose of civil unrest, and using it in any other format would be breaking a federal law. However, I'm blown away by the question, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a very specific reason why our justice system entails several avenues that are required in order to be even investigated. So the idea that just because of a political opponent being in the way of what you want would be something that would allow you as a current sitting president to invoke the Insurrection Act, in order to have the military round up your political opponents, would immediately be something that would break federal law and would put the military at risk. And it would be an unlawful order. So no, the answer is no. I am genuinely, concerned about the questions that I have received with regards to this particular act. It's frightening to me to think that somehow people have this in their minds, that this would be doable. It's frightening to me to think that they've heard this from somewhere and they're getting disinformation at this level, that they believe that just finding the right loophole could upend our entire democracy. There are checks and balances put into place for that reason. If you're a person who feels that President Trump has reason to be upset about the election, the proper place to take those kinds of disputes are the courts, in which I have read every single court case that has actually been taken or tried, all 62 of them. And unfortunately, in all 62 cases, a good portion of them heard by President Trump appointed judges, Republican judges, there was no widespread voter fraud found. So the idea that someone would think that it would be okay to use an act that's expressly used to overturn another act in order to only protect citizens from riots and some form of community devastation, and using it for the purpose of disenfranchising the people's will with no proof and no courts backing that, after 62 cases, I'm sorry, I mean, that is just really upsetting. That's really upsetting. You don't have to like the outcome of something when it comes to our elections. For example, many times I don't. Many times I don't. I'm an independent. So I value both sides of the aisle. But this that's suggested with these questions is pure insanity. And I would say the borderline of this would be absolute tyranny. And there is no other way to put it. It is only those that don't believe in democracy or don't care about democracy that attempt to try to put their political opponents in prison, or attempt to try to shut down free press, for example. These things are all things that I've gotten questions about that lead me to believe that they're getting this information from somewhere where they think that this is a possibility. It's very scary and very sad. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood what these acts are, what actual powers this provides to the president, any president. And I guess to give you a warning that sometimes you have to take yourself out of where you're getting your information for a while and stop listening to it all the time. Break away from it. Pay more attention to your own family, your dogs, your cats. Go on walks and get away from it for a few days and really stop and think about whether what you're hearing makes logical sense. You have to use your critical thinking skills. And then get on the law library, one of the law library websites, or go to a law library and actually pull up the acts and read it, and read any amendments to those acts, and read any acts that act might actually be infringing upon. And then take a look at when those acts have been used in the past. And just pay attention to what reality is. Because what's being suggested in these questions that I'm not even going to go any further to answer because I answered the two main ones is not realistic. It's not only not realistic, it's not right. Wherever you're getting your information from is disinformation. And as we know, disinformation can be very dangerous. All right, everyone, I hope this answered questions for you. and I hope it was informative. Take care, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.